personal favorite example that makes it easy to show the finding the middle of the lane balancing concept is talking about speed on final. If you carry a lot of speed on final, there are good things and bad things about it. You take more space to land. The controls are more sensitive. You bump the airplane around, and more changes that you might make in your flying are more critical. You thump along on the ground a whole lot worse. When you go over that gopher hole, you're more likely to tear the gear out. You have better margin over the stall. You have better wind penetration. There are good things and bad things about them, and what you're trying to do is find that middle point where you're balancing the benefits of going slow against the benefits of going fast so that you get the best outcome you can achieve. You gotta do these things thinking about them. So the next things, I did the thinking on this one and talked about speed on final. You have a similar balancing problem when you talk about McCready cross-country speed, and this is a great example. The pilot that sets a very low speed to fly goes slow. He's the #1 pilot with lots of little thermals, doesn't get as far, stays nice and high. The pilot that sets the truly optimum speed to fly flies fast, passes up all the little thermals, but he reaches the ground before he reaches that big thermal out ahead. The guy that finds the midpoint in the situation is able to pass up the little thermals and still make the big thermal while he's still high enough to take advantage of it. So let's move on to field selection and drag you folks into the game. Got a couple of choices for field selection and what the benefits and trade-offs are. So let's have a couple of people come in and crib in with their things about, all right, what are the good things, what are the bad things, how do you find the balance? You've got the small field versus large field choice. You're thinking about, what are you going to land in? Am I better off landing in a small field? Am I better off landing in a large field? What are my issues? What are my choices? I personally like lots of small fields better than one large field far away. The choice, the large field is great for landing in, but the ability to see the details of the individual field has some real advantages. Every time you land in a field, you've got some risk of running into a small object that you can't see from the air. They're there. They're certainly. I mean, I've seen gopher hole this big that would just tear the wheel right off your glider. But you're balancing those issues against the issue of landing in worse places. Here, remember. So we're going to move on to the next one and talk about takeoff and tow. And again, we're looking for what are the choices. So anybody that weighs in, I want to get a positive and a negative. Think about what choices you're making in this aspect of your flying. We make a choice about which way we point the glider, where we're taking off from. We choose to have our takeoff area be out in the middle towards the main runway. What are the good things about that? Clear of obstacles, you're clear of the rest of the operations. What are the bad things? Simplest bad thing, we do it all the time. Serious problem. What we've chosen is we're putting the gliders out there where the gliders have the fewest obstructions, but the consequence of that choice is that our operation has to go back and forth across our primary landing runway. I mean, these are not clear-cut choices. It's not clear which is better.
What's your alternative?
Well, the alternative could be to stage the gliders on the outside near our operation. Now, the people aren't going back and forth all the time. The gliders are now out to the side, closer initially to the people and other stuff, so that you don't have as clear a path at the very outset of your takeoff roll, but you've taken a huge amount of traffic out of the crossing the active runway. And you've eliminated the problem of the tendency that we actually have of the crowd congregates out there and goes, I do it. You know, I go out there, I congregate with the people launching the gliders and talk to the folks out there, but it's a downside.
Yeah.
You know, the other part of that downside is forget about it as an individual safety issue. It pushes our retrieves much farther down the runway. You know, the average retrieve to bring the glider back to the line is much longer. Why? Because he has to be up above the grid to be safe. So he has to land further down the runway. This isn't, you know, a problem or an issue so much as these are things that we're choosing. And we make these choices, and they have, every choice that we make has you know, some benefits and some problems. And the important thing is that we think about them. Pattern management. We tend to make patterns that carry energy or have low energy. Talk about the trade-offs. What are the issues? If you've got a high, broad pattern, you have a much easier time making an accurate touchdown. You have more time to fix it. If you're carrying a tight, lower energy pattern, you have more time to find a thermal and climb away. Choices either way. Every one of these things makes a choice. Every time we think about it, you make a choice. Down low, you've got more issues with wind shear coming over the trees, the other factors that are the low altitude factors. You make a nice, tall, steep final. Those are not issues. So you have benefits to each way of doing things. You have costs to each way of doing things. Where do you put your pattern? Why? Who's got a pattern story? Where do you put your pattern? And now the important question, Ken. Why? What are the advantages of having it in tight? Why do you want to be farther out? The thing I'd like to know is that you've thought about how far out you're going to be and why. You're making a trade-off. I mean, I like being tight in so I can see it. I like being far away because it gives me better control of my pattern and landing and where I'm going to put it. I'm balancing those two issues. I like to be right up there where I can see what I'm going to land on, what the obstructions are, whether the guy's going to run out. I can't see over the trees to see the people on the ground. You know, I taught you know, one of the very top pilots in this club years ago, and he was making these patterns, and the, you know, the pattern was, you know, beautiful, right on the stadium surface, you know, making his turns, getting in, and he couldn't get the thing to land where he wanted it. He was making landings that were much longer than he wanted, and he was frustrated. And you know, what did we do? We went out and we pushed him further away, further up the stadium, further out, and now all of a sudden he had a final with some substantive length, and he could control where he was going to put the glider. It was an amazing, simple difference that made it possible for him to touch down accurately, where this is a guy that had very high level of skill, but he couldn't get it to land where he wanted because the margins were too thin. It was just too hard to control it.